I came to the district, I believe it was the fall of 1995, and I came as the principal at Franklin Elementary School. At that time, Franklin was part of the deseg plan. It was a foreign language immersion school. We had, well, it was a partial immersion. We had kids that took half a day in English and a half a day in a foreign language. And we had French and Spanish at Franklin. I was there for a full year, and then we began transitioning it to a neighborhood school. And at that time, when Franklin closed as a foreign language immersion school, I became principal of Foreign Language Academy, which at that time was a middle school. And during that period, if I remember correctly, Foreign Language Middle School was the only freestanding middle school, foreign language immersion middle school in the United States. Then during that period, we transitioned into a K-8 French, Spanish, and German school. And we closed the German and we stayed then with a K-8 French, or K-8 Spanish, and a 6-8 French. My counterpart colleague was principal of the French foreign language K-5, which was located just about 3 or 4 blocks from me. So we said we operated then the foreign language school for the district on 2 campuses. That was Galehurst.
Okay.
When I came, of course, coming in '95, a lot of things had already been in place. But my experience, and in terms of the integration of my school, they were very much aware of the quota that we had in terms of making it a really diverse school. And that was one of the things that I remember, and I especially remember it when I went to foreign language middle school. Once we became a K-8 program, well, I think even before then, we took at the 6th grade level, I remember we took between 90 and 100 6th graders who had never had any experience in a foreign language. So we ran what we called the core program and the immersion. So we had students entering for the first time at the 6th grade level. They took everything in English, except they had 1 period a day in a foreign language of their choice, and that was taught by a native speaker. That's pretty much like the programs that you find in suburban schools. So that I thought was a wonderful program, and that gave an opportunity then for students in the Kansas City School District to begin their study of a language. And after they had 3 years then, they began to develop an understanding and had some insight into maybe this is what they wanted to continue when they went to high school. Along with that, at foreign language, you could only enter our program at kindergarten or the first semester of 2nd grade. After I left, they no longer took the students at 6th grade, and you could only be there if you started in an immersion program. I thought it was very important that students that didn't get in kindergarten later on had an opportunity to start a study. And that also gave us 90 to 100 extra enrollment at that time, because usually if you had, say, 6 kindergartners in the immersion, you were lucky to have 3 full 5th grades, because mobility, kids moving from the district, or deciding it wasn't a good fit for them. But that's pretty much my role at that particular time. I stayed strictly in the foreign language. I no experience in the traditional schools. From my experience, the community was very positive with our integration. I can't recall what our percentage was, but we were truly an integrated school. One of the things, though, that we constantly fought was not to allow students coming in who spoke, for example, Spanish. Of course, their parents wanted them to come to an immersion school because there was a language that they were familiar to, but we knew, or familiar with, but we knew those students needed an English school because if they were going to stay in our country, they needed to speak English. So that was a constant struggle. It was hard for them to understand, and parents were comfortable coming in when all the teachers spoke their native language, and I understand that. I don't know if that's still the case. I don't know if that's been changed or not. But we were successful in that because they just needed experience in English. It wasn't fair to the kids, we thought.
Right, so you're saying that the kids coming in who were already Spanish speakers.
Uh-huh. Yeah, they were native speakers. We didn't feel that was a school for them. And we had, I think there were board policies to that. But we constantly would find that this was an issue. I can remember one incident, however, that we did change, and I don't remember what the parent did, but he was sent over here for 1 year only for some kind of special training, and he brought his family. And that was a Spanish-speaking family. Because they had no intent of staying in America, we allowed that student to come for that 1 year and continue in Spanish. We found that the students in kindergarten and first grade were taught everything in the foreign language. Then we began picking up, we called it English reading, at the second grade. If I remember correctly, it was a little bit later, but we changed it to the second grade. And then the students in fifth grade, they were on grade level in English. Of course, the more fluent that the students were in their own native language, which would be English, the quicker they caught on, of course, and that's true. Our kids come to school with, a lot of them, with limited language experience, but they were very successful. Occasionally we found that it was not a fit for the students. That was usually early on, difficulty with sounds, but for whatever reason, but very few students did we suggest that they might want to go to them. But our students were achieving. We put some new things in place, and of course I was always grateful for the opportunity. If we had some ideas, if we could defend them, we were given permission, and we did some things instructionally that we thought were very positive, but our students were achieving, and we had visitors. We laughed and said we were the tourist center for the district because we were always having visitors. As I remember the attitude of some of the other schools, kind of haves and the have-nots, we had I don't say overabundance, but we had finances at our disposal that I'm not sure that they did. And I'm sure if I were a principal in a traditional school, I'd have some of the same feelings. And if I remember correctly, toward the end of my tenure at the school, the district began to put extra money, and I can't remember what they had a name for it, but they were given extra money to help compensate for their not having what we had. And it's kind of like the haves and the have-nots. Well, all I can do is speak for mine. My students enjoyed it. And because we were really a diverse community. There were lots of advantages for my kids as they began becoming friends with students that probably had more experiences available to them, and it was just a nice melting pot. It was a good attitude, and you saw friends becoming friends regardless of the race, and that was positive. Well, we had to stay on top of that. We had admissions work very closely with us. And sometimes students, they would come and visit our school, and parents would go to the admissions and want to come in our program. And our constant battle was, they would say, well, the program's closed. And then they would let me know, and then I would say, no, it's not closed. And that was a challenge, but also I'm sure it was a challenge for the admissions department. But we worked very closely. I was very fortunate in that the person who was in charge of admissions worked with us, and that the building of relationship for me helped us to be successful. Our target was the 40%. Did we always have it? No, but that was constantly at the forefront. Well, I think one of the contributions that I think was when I became principal of the immersion schools, I began to look at the curriculum. And there had been opportunity, if I remember correctly, for the native speakers to begin writing their own curriculum. Well, as I observed, and they were doing a good job, but as I began to look and observe and think about it, to me there was some changes that need to be made. If the district had a curriculum, we didn't need a new curriculum. We just need to teach it in a native language. So we began to put that in place. Now that was not well received with some of the immersion teachers, because from their background, what they felt that they needed to teach, that should be okay. So we began to implement that. And another principle, once we began to close some of the foreign language schools that had a lot of empty seats and condensed the program into 2 schools, we then worked very closely together. And we began then, our curriculum was the district curriculum, was not taught in English, it was taught in a native language, French, Spanish, and German. The German program, of course, when I went to foreign language middle, I think, if I remember correctly, we phased it out in a couple of years. But our French and our Spanish was taught in the native language. But I also began to take a look at the instructional level of our kids. I was a teaching principal. I taught right along with the teachers. I taught English reading. I taught a block of English reading every day for 7th graders. My vice principals taught in their field. Our program administrator taught. So we were teaching principals. We were in the trenches with the teachers. We felt like that's important to know some of the challenges that our teachers were having. So one of the things, it was obvious to me, you may have a group of 7th graders that were reading all the way from pre-K or kindergarten, let's just say, up through 7th grade, okay, and so that didn't make sense to me for a teacher to have an expectation that she or he is going to have 7 or 8 reading groups. Didn't make sense because you couldn't do it. So we began, and we received permission after a lot of pleading. We organized our entire building in language arts based on the instructional level of the kids. And that took some unique scheduling, and I had a vice principal that was very good in scheduling. And so we began looking at certification of teachers, and 6th grade teachers were certified, usually in elementary. So all of my 6th grade teachers could teach language arts. So in our schedule, we had a block, 2-period block, an hour and a half, yes, a 90-minute block, and our students went to their language arts teacher based on their instructional level. Now, we had to defend this because they said it was tracking, but it wasn't tracking. It was based on instructional level, and we moved our kids. We were constantly moving kids up. Very seldom did we put them back because we learned quickly. It's better to move up and make a mistake that way than to put them too high and go back, because that's not good for the confidence of the student. And so we had a lot of visitors come and take a look at what we were doing, and as I said, that was a challenge. I got tired of defending the fact that we're not tracking. But one of our deseg people, monitors, came in our building and was very much impressed with that. And as I understood later, and said, this is what we need to be doing in all of our buildings. We bought an accelerated reading program, which was a motivating piece for our program, and our kids really began to move. And I think that in of itself was something that I think we brought to the district. And now I think it's very common. We take a look at putting kids in their instructional level. I think it gave me opportunity to meet all levels of parents that were members of our community and to work with them based on their needs. And I think that opened my eyes to the real meaning of urban education. When I would go into meet some of the parents and take kids to their homes when they couldn't get home in the evening after some of our activities. And then at the same time, began to be aware there is a difference in our language. You always read and research when you're going to school the difference in vocabulary that our urban kids bring to kindergarten versus kids from suburban, and that's really true. So that began to open my eyes that we start behind so we can all learn. It takes some of us twice as long to go half as far. I don't think I ever gave much thought to the location because our kids had opportunity for transportation, and that was wonderful, because regardless of where our school was located, I felt like if parents had to move, and you know they're very mobile, that was one stability in their life. They could go to school, and I never thought about that. We had middle class. We had both middle class African American and middle class Caucasian, and we had some middle class Hispanic. So I felt like that we attracted all levels. Well, our goal was, first of all, to make sure our kids could read. If our kids can't read, how can we expect them to be successful? To read, write, and think. And that was our goal. And that all of our emphasis was placed on getting our kids to read. That was the instructional level. Once we began to take a look at that and watch our students achieve based on their scores, we monitored that very closely. Not that it was certainly nothing like their monitoring test scores now, but our accelerated reading program, we watched that very closely, and we would ask the teachers, is this where you see the students performing? And we could look at their writing, and in those days we were beginning to keep a profile of students' work, and we could really see from the beginning of the year what their writing looked like to where they were, and you could see that growth instructionally following just based on the writing. But I think When we looked at that, then we began to take a look at math. Well, if we can group according to instructional level in language arts, we should be able to do the same thing in math. Now, we didn't have as many groups as math because math in 7th and 8th grade, especially, you had to have a special certification. So we were very, very cognizant of making sure our teachers were teaching within their certified area. So our goal was to get them as close to grade level and above when they left our school. And I might say, just digressing a little bit, one of our biggest challenges was keeping our kids, some of our kids, in our program in 6th through 8. Our scores were pretty good in the 5th grade. So Lincoln was interested in getting our students to come to them in 6th grade. And of course, in our African American community, Lincoln was a high expectation for them to get their kids into Lincoln. So it was difficult to say to them, with their scores, they're still going to get in high school. But they kind of thought if they didn't get in 6th grade, they wouldn't get in high school. So that was a fight. And I can understand. I would like all my students to come on grade level too. So that was just a constant challenge, and we were always down central office complaining about this. But we began to have a good working relationship.
So
they wanted them in 6th grade. They watched very closely to our 5th grade scores. And so of course that helped them in their
keep them 6th grade.
keep their classes. And it was hard to get some of our parents to understand, you're okay, you're going to get in 9th grade, but stay here because it gives you 3 more years of your language. And if our students came to us in kindergarten and stayed through 8th grade, they were well on their way to being bilingual. In fact, some of our 8th grade students were called on to do some interpreting in the city for organizations. We were constantly looking for ways to showcase our kids. We constantly were working on this, constantly were showing opportunities that would be available to them. And then when our students would go to, we had a lot of our students that, well, not a lot, but we had several of our students that went to private schools in high school, and a lot of our some of our African American went to one particular school. And as the kids came back and knew some of the kids that were still in our school, they looked up to them, and that was an opportunity. But I think they did. We were constantly sharing with our parents that the advantages of what they're going to have, whether it's in college, in business, and by all means keep your language up. I think probably one of the most outstanding social outcome for our kids in Kansas City during the magnet school deseg time was the opportunity for field trips. The experiences that they had were unlimited. One of the things that we constantly looked at as we were looking at our curriculum, we were constantly on the lookout for field trips that would add a dimension to what was being taught. And that was really interesting. We began to develop field trips that would go along with this unit in social studies, this unit in math, and that in of itself was wonderful because kids of poverty doesn't make any difference what your race is. It's a socioeconomic fact here. If they don't have the money for these experiences, and because of the money that was available with DSEG, kids had unlimited field trips, and it was free to the kids. Also, we made it a point when I came to have an experience outside of the district. When I came to the district, they, I think, were taking trips outside of the country. But when I went to the middle school, we discovered a language school in Minnesota. And they had different types of camps, be a Spanish camp, a French camp, a German camp, and so on. But because we had deseg money, our students went to Minnesota. And then also we took a group of our French students, then in 8th grade, their trip was to New Orleans. And so in the French culture. So that was, I just thought, a limited experience. Kids had never ridden on an airplane. And that, I just don't think you can put a price tag to those experiences. And later on, the kids would come back and they remembered that. But in the language camp, it was, if you went to a Spanish language camp, nothing was spoken except Spanish. And those were good days, and everybody could go. Didn't make that we didn't have to raise money to go. This was available, because if it's good for one, it's good for all. Well, I think it offered an opportunity for students in higher socioeconomic levels to experience having their students go to school with students that were less fortunate, and hopefully that they would learn the importance of giving back to the community. And I think this was always something that was in the back of a lot of our minds, that much is given, much is expected. Mm-hmm. And I think they developed a compassion and an appreciation for one another, regardless of their socioeconomic, and knowing that sometime, because of their advantages and their background, that they could give back to this group. Well, maybe it's because I'm from an old school. Mm-hmm. But we know from research, and we tout this over and over, if a student isn't on grade level in reading by the time they're in 3rd grade, it's difficult to catch up. Well, if that's the case, I believe K through 3 emphasis should be on reading, writing, and thinking, and basic math skills. Because I don't care how many kids take the SAT or the ACT or how many go to college, we have an awful lot of students that are not successful, in my way of thinking, because they cannot read. And I would think if we spent K through 3 teaching our kids to learn to read, then let's then shift in 4th grade and read to learn. We wouldn't have, I think we could move quicker. That's me. I know that to me you're limited if you can't read. And I know that before I left, we used to, and well, even after I left, knowing, working in schools in another capacity, we used to take a look. I would work with the principals. How much time do you really have in your day to teach reading? And it was unbelievable, unbelievable. Kids they were given opportunities. I'm not saying they weren't important, but I just think that if we focused and we found a reading program, now that's a little bias in my thing. There are programs out there that were developed only for urban kids. And we had an opportunity later on after DSEC to experience a short period of time. And I was a tutor after retiring in that program, and those kindergarten kids read just like my kindergarten did in suburban. Mm-hmm. But so many times as in urban districts, it doesn't last very long to get the full benefit.
What was that?
That was Success for All.
Success for All.
And that program was written by Robert Slavin, who was also the author of Cooperative Learning. And we had an opportunity to really see that. But I think people lost sight of the advantages of the reading and took it political. But anyway, I saw firsthand
Was Success
what the
for
kids
All brought in by one of the superintendents?
Yes, it was brought in. And I think got mixed up in the political ballgame. But it was, and teachers later on, when I was working in another capacity in our buildings, used to say, oh, is there any way we could get back to Success for All? Our kids could read. But it was a program developed just for urban kids, and it had so much language. And even the tutoring, they had developed a program that went right along with the regular there was just not a gap, from my way of thinking.
What was the oppositions to?
Oh, they said it was script, and then it might have been a type of script in the beginning, but teachers taught it without reading it word for word. But and then I think they got mixed up on the politics of kickback. Well, we ordered the trade books from all companies. Wherever we could find the cheapest, we ordered from them. But we, in the deseg days, I personally had a lot of opportunity to make good decisions, and we didn't have to defend so much any kind of material. I know one time in looking over opportunities for kids to gain reading materials based on their instructional level, I ran across a company, and I shall never forget, I was teaching the low group of 7th graders. And I knew those 7th graders needed experience, but reading at a 1st and 2nd grade level, it was difficult to find stories that was written at a 7th grade interest level. And we found a company I shall never forget. I found Rip Van Winkle written on a 2nd grade level. I found a series in that company that the students in 7th grade won a trip. And they went through the United States and saw things in the United States. Well, that's social studies. But it was written on their reading level. I shall never forget that. And the DSEG money allowed me to put in that whole series. And I shall never forget, we were talking about, in one of the stories, I'm digressing a little bit, we came across a story where a student had thrown a ball and broke a window pane. And I shall never forget the expression of my students. How can a window have pane? That was an example of the limited language experiences and knowledge that our students started school with. In suburban, they would know a window is a window pane. But I shall never forget the look on that, and that really led me to think we've got to give the kids the language experience, not just word calling, so that they have a full understanding. For me, I challenge the opportunity to have worked in the foreign language immersion program. It opened a whole new world of me. I said, my teachers, we became very close. They all had stories to tell. I had an opportunity a colleague and I went to Canada and were able to bring French teachers back. We were a melting pot. We had teachers from the Cameroon, teachers from Peru, teachers from Spain, and it was wonderful. And to think that our students had an opportunity to experience school life with these people, because we also had built in our program in foreign language the cultural aspect. And not only did they teach the language, we had cultural experiences. That was a part of the program. And we had personnel, thanks to the DSEG money, that we were able to give the kids opportunities to be with them and experience that. To me, was one of the most challenging. And when I experiences, I treasure that. And there were times after I left and went to central office that I missed that. I really did. And still treasure relationships. Some of the foreign teachers are still here. And I had the unfortunate experience to go to funerals of some of these teachers, but we developed, there was a camaraderie, there was a bond with our staff, and even our English-speaking staff still talk about and still are, what a wonderful time it was. Well, we did everything to make it easy. One of the first things that, and during those days, I had wonderful supervisors, that we had a lot of wonderful staff development. Spent hours in staff development, which was required. And Dr. Janice Cade was my immediate supervisor, and she was wonderful in providing this. We knew from experience that we would have to hold their hands. I bought many a bed. We took our teachers to get their Social Security, to do what everything needed to do to find departments, and I think the fact that they knew they had support here helped them make that transition. And we were constantly aware in the evenings to double check on them. If somebody was ill, if their children were ill, make sure they knew what to do. And our whole community wrapped their arms around our native speakers, and that was another positive thing. And it was, some of them, I'm not going to say it was an easy, but for the most part, and the very fact that they still stayed and got their green card, I think that said a lot. And and they're still here today.
Yes, that's
very few, in my knowledge, went back. And I think another experience that is a takeaway for me was the opportunity to work with Cardell Hull and getting our students certified. And that's when our Director of Certified Personnel worked very closely with the State Department. And that was an experience, because we made sure that they had a degree, or as much as we could make sure, and then we had to have their credentials evaluated. And that was interesting, and to see what the evaluator, indicated at what level of education they would have in the United States, and then working with UMKC here to get them enrolled in school. And UMKC was very cooperative. And we followed that very closely to make sure they didn't get off track and take another class that they thought they would like instead of what they needed. So they earned their certification, and the state was just very cooperative. But that all, I think, goes back to the person who was in charge of our certified personnel. It all goes back to relationships. Mm-hmm.